In Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood, a 68-year-old British widow was about to face the fight of her life. What started as a routine doctor's appointment took a shocking turn when she discovered a family conspiracy. Bridget Jones wasn't your typical retired bookshop owner. For 20 years, she had navigated American culture as a sharp-witted British expat known for her fierce independence. When she encountered her stepdaughter's calculated lies about dementia, she had no idea she was walking into a legal trap. Bridget's refusal to surrender would expose the dark reality of elder abuse targeting vulnerable immigrants. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Bridget Jones stood in the sterile waiting room of Dr. Patterson's clinic, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as the receptionist's fingers clicked across her keyboard with increasing irritation. The appointment she'd been certain was at 2:30 had apparently been scheduled for 1:30, and now she was an hour late for what should have been a routine checkup. "I'm terribly sorry," Bridget said, adjusting her handbag nervously. "I could have sworn I wrote down 2:30 in my diary. Perhaps there's been some confusion with the American way of writing dates? I still get muddled sometimes after all these years." The receptionist, a young woman with purple-streaked hair and multiple piercings, looked up with barely concealed annoyance. "Mrs. Jones, this is the third time this has happened. Dr. Patterson had to see another patient because you weren't here." "Third time?" Bridget felt a flutter of panic in her chest. "Surely not. I'm usually quite punctual. Robert always said I was annoyingly prompt, actually." Before the receptionist could respond, the clinic door chimed, and Jessica Miller-Thompson swept in with her characteristic blend of Southern charm and concerned efficiency. Even in Portland's casual atmosphere, Jessica managed to look perfectly put together in her designer athleisure wear, her blonde hair pulled back in a meticulously messy bun. "Bridget, honey, there you are." Jessica's voice carried that particular tone of relief mixed with gentle chiding that had become increasingly familiar. "I was worried when you didn't answer your phone. The appointment was at 1:30, remember?" "Was it?" Bridget's confidence wavered further. "I was so certain." Jessica moved smoothly to the reception desk, her smile warm and apologetic. "I'm so sorry about this. She's been having some confusion with scheduling lately." She lowered her voice conspiratorially, but not so quietly that Bridget couldn't hear. "It's been happening more often since my father passed. The stress, you know? And she's still adjusting to American systems after all these years." The receptionist's expression softened immediately. "Oh, of course, that makes sense. Let me see if Dr. Patterson can squeeze her in." Bridget felt heat rise in her cheeks, part embarrassment, part indignation. She wanted to protest that she'd been navigating American systems perfectly well for 20 years. "Thank you very much." But the words stuck in her throat. After all, she was the one who'd gotten the time wrong, apparently. 20 minutes later, as they walked to their cars, Jessica linked her arm through Bridget's with practiced familiarity. "You know, honey, maybe it would help if I started managing your appointments for you, just until things get easier. I know Daddy always handled a lot of that stuff." "Robert handled the bills and insurance," Bridget replied carefully. "But I've always managed my own calendar. I ran a bookshop for 15 years, Jessica. I think I can handle a doctor's appointment." "Of course you can." Jessica's agreement came too quickly, too brightly. "I just meant, it might be nice to have some support. Family should help family, don't you think?" That evening, Bridget sat in her garden with Winston, her aging corgi, watching the late afternoon light filter through the Japanese maple Robert had planted their first spring in the house. The tree had grown magnificent over the years, its leaves now turning the deep crimson that made Portland autumns so spectacular. She'd lived in this city longer than she'd lived anywhere since leaving London, yet moments like today made her feel like a perpetual outsider. "What do you think, Winston?" she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "Am I losing my mind, or was that appointment really at 2:30? Winston looked up at her with the patient expression of a dog who'd heard many such one-sided conversations over his 12 years. His muzzle was now more gray than brown, and he moved with the careful deliberation of age, but his eyes remained bright and attentive. The sound of footsteps on the garden path interrupted her brooding. Carmen Santos approached with her characteristic brisk stride, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the comfortable walking shoes that had carried her through hundreds of miles of neighborhood streets over the past year. "Good evening, Mrs. Jones. Ready for Winston's constitutional?" Bridget smiled genuinely for the first time that day. Carmen had appeared in her life like a godsend 6 months after Robert's death, when Bridget had posted a notice at the community center, looking for someone to help with Winston's daily walks. Her advancing age and Winston's stubbornness had made their twice-daily walks increasingly challenging, and Carmen had proven to be exactly what they both needed. "Please, Carmen, how many times must I tell you? It's Bridget. Mrs. Jones makes me sound like a headmistress." Carmen grinned, clipping Winston's lead to his collar with practiced efficiency. "Old habits. My grandmother would box my ears if she heard me calling an elder by her first name." "Your grandmother sounds formidable. I think I'd have liked her." "You would have. She had your same way of saying exactly what she thought. Consequences be damned." Carmen paused, studying Bridget's face with the perceptive gaze that had made her so effective in her former career. "Rough day?" Bridget hesitated. Carmen had become more than just Winston's dog walker over the past months. She'd become something approaching a friend. But admitting to memory problems felt like opening a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. Just the usual confusion about appointments and such. Nothing dramatic. Carmen's expression sharpened almost imperceptibly. In her 15 years as an immigration caseworker, she'd developed a finely tuned radar for the kinds of struggles that immigrants, even long-term residents like Bridget, faced when they began to seem vulnerable. The way people suddenly started speaking slower, offering unsolicited help, questioning competency they'd never questioned before. What kind of confusion? "Oh, you know how it is. American scheduling systems. Medical appointments. I sometimes wonder if I'll ever truly master the intricacies of this country's bureaucracy." Carmen nodded, but something in Bridget's tone didn't quite ring true. After decades of listening to people navigate complex systems while dealing with cultural barriers, she could usually distinguish between genuine confusion and something else. This felt like something else. "Well, Winston and I will sort ourselves out. You just put your feet up and have a nice cup of tea. Very British solution to most problems, yes?" Bridget laughed despite herself. "Quite right. Though I've corrupted myself with American coffee over the years. Robert's influence, I'm afraid." As Carmen and Winston disappeared around the corner, Bridget found herself thinking about that morning's doctor's appointment again. She walked back into her house and straight to the kitchen, where her appointment diary sat open on the counter next to the telephone. There, in her own handwriting, clear as day, "Dr. Patterson, Thursday, 2:30 p.m. She stared at the entry for a long moment, then flipped back through the previous pages. Her handwriting was consistent, neat, perfectly legible, no signs of confusion or uncertainty. So why had the appointment been scheduled for 1:30? The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Jessica's voice bubbled through the receiver with characteristic enthusiasm. "Bridget, honey, I wanted to remind you about Sunday dinner this week. Mike's making his famous barbecue, and Tyler's coming up from college. It'll be so nice to have the whole family together." "That sounds lovely, dear. What time would you like me there?" "Oh, the usual time. 4 o'clock? And Bridget? Maybe don't drive yourself this time. The traffic on Highway 26 has been absolutely terrible lately, and you know how those other drivers can be with older drivers." Bridget felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. "I've been driving that route for 20 years, Jessica. I think I can manage." "Of course you can. I just worry, you know. Daddy always worried about you driving alone, especially after the confusion started." "What confusion?" The pause on the other end of the line stretched just a beat too long. "Oh, you know, honey. The little things. Missing appointments, forgetting conversations. It's perfectly normal at your age. Nothing to be ashamed of." After hanging up, Bridget stood in her kitchen feeling as though the ground had shifted slightly beneath her feet. She couldn't remember Robert ever expressing concern about her driving. He'd been proud of how well she'd adapted to American roads, how confidently she navigated Portland's sometimes confusing street grid. She opened her appointment diary again and stared at the entry for Dr. Patterson. Her handwriting. Her pen. Her memory of writing it down immediately after making the appointment over the phone. But appointments don't schedule themselves for different times, and receptionists don't make mistakes about things like that 3 times in a row. Unless she was the one making the mistakes. The thought settled over her like a cold mist, carrying with it all the fears that had lurked at the edges of her consciousness since Robert's death. Was this how it started? Small confusion, missed appointments, stories repeated without memory of telling them before? Outside, she could hear Carmen's voice calling out cheerful greetings to neighbors as she and Winston made their way through the tree-lined streets of the Hawthorne district. The sound was reassuring, normal, a reminder that life continued in its predictable patterns even when your own internal compass seemed to be spinning. But as Bridget closed her appointment diary and began preparing her solitary dinner, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Not with her memory, exactly, but with the way her memory was being perceived, interpreted, managed. She thought of Jessica's concerned voice on the phone, the receptionist's knowing look, the way conversations seemed to happen around her rather than with her lately. It was as though she was slowly becoming a character in someone else's story about an aging British woman who couldn't quite manage on her own anymore. The kettle whistled, sharp and insistent, calling her back to the present moment. As she prepared her tea, properly, the way her mother had taught her 60 years ago, Bridget Jones made a decision. If her memory was failing, she'd face it head-on with typical British stoicism. But if something else was happening, something more deliberate and calculated, she'd face that too. After all, she'd spent 15 years running a bookshop full of mysteries and thrillers. She knew how these stories were supposed to unfold. The question was whether she was the detective or the victim. The following Tuesday morning found Bridget questioning that decision as she sat in the community center's meeting room, surrounded by the familiar faces of her book club. The monthly gathering had been one of her lifelines since Robert's death, 2 hours of spirited literary discussion with women who'd become more than acquaintances over the years. Today, however, something felt different. Margaret Chen, the retired librarian who'd founded the group, was speaking more slowly than usual, enunciating each word with the careful precision people used when addressing someone they weren't sure could follow along. We're discussing chapters 7 through 12 today, Bridget. Do you remember which book we're reading? The question stung. Of course she remembered. They were reading Louise Penny's latest Inspector Gamache novel. She'd finished it 3 days ago and had been looking forward to discussing the intricate plotting and character development. But before she could respond, the community center door opened, and Jessica appeared with a bright smile and a plate of homemade cookies. I hope you don't mind the interruption, ladies. I brought some treats for Bridget's book club. Jessica's southern charm was in full effect as she set the plate on the table. She mentioned how much she enjoys these gatherings, though she's been a bit confused about the meeting times lately. Confused? Eleanor Martinez, a retired teacher, looked up with interest. Bridget's always been our most punctual member. Jessica's smile remained steady, but Bridget caught the subtle calculation in her stepdaughter's eyes. Oh, you know how it is. Little things here and there. She called me last week asking if the meeting was on Tuesday or Wednesday. Sweet thing. She's been having some trouble with her British way of writing dates versus the American system. Bridget felt her face flush. She'd never called Jessica about the book club meeting schedule. She'd had it memorized for over 2 years. But protesting now would only make her sound defensive, confused. She remained silent, watching as Jessica worked her magic on the group. It's so common with our international friends, Jessica continued, her voice filled with gentle understanding. The cultural differences can be overwhelming, especially as we age. Daddy always worried about how she'd manage the American systems without his help. Ruth Goldman, who'd immigrated from Eastern Europe decades ago, nodded sympathetically. The administrative differences can be challenging. I still struggle with some things after 40 years. Exactly, Jessica beamed. That's why I've been trying to help more. taking her to appointments, helping with paperwork. It's what family does, right? As Jessica finally left, promising to return in 2 hours to make sure Bridget gets home safely, the atmosphere in the room had shifted palpably. The women who'd debated literary themes with her for years now spoke to her with gentle patience, offering to explain plot points she understood perfectly well, suggesting she might want to reread chapters she'd analyzed thoroughly. Margaret even offered to drive her home, despite knowing Bridget had driven herself to book club meetings for 2 years without incident. "That's very kind, Margaret, but I'm perfectly capable of driving myself," Bridget said, trying to keep the irritation out of her voice. "Of course you are, dear," Margaret replied with the tone one might use with a stubborn child. "It's just that the traffic has been so heavy lately, and Jessica seems genuinely concerned." Walking to her car after the meeting, Bridget felt as though she was living in some sort of parallel universe where her competency had mysteriously evaporated overnight. The worst part was how natural it all felt to everyone else, how easily they'd accepted Jessica's narrative about her declining abilities. At home, she found Carmen returning from Winston's walk, the corgi trotting beside her with the satisfied air of a dog who'd thoroughly investigated every interesting smell on Hawthorne Boulevard. "How was book club?" Carmen asked, but her expression sharpened as she took in Bridget's face. "What happened?" "Nothing dramatic, just different." Bridget took Winston's leash, grateful for his warm, uncomplicated presence. "People seem to think I need more help than I used to." Carmen's professional instincts kicked in. In her casework days, she'd learned to recognize the subtle signs of someone being systematically undermined, the way confidence could be eroded through 1,000 small cuts, how perceptions could be shifted through careful manipulation of social networks. "What kind of help?" "Oh, driving, remembering things, following conversations." Bridget's voice carried forced lightness. Winston looked up at her with the patient expression of a dog who'd heard many such one-sided conversations over his 12 years. His muzzle was now more gray than brown, and he moved with the careful deliberation of age, but his eyes remained bright and attentive. The sound of footsteps on the garden path interrupted her brooding. Carmen Santos approached with her characteristic brisk stride, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the comfortable walking shoes that had carried her through hundreds of miles of neighborhood streets over the past year. "Good evening, Mrs. Jones. Ready for Winston's constitutional?" Bridget smiled genuinely for the first time that day. Carmen had appeared in her life like a godsend 6 months after Robert's death, when Bridget had posted a notice at the community center looking for someone to help with Winston's daily walks. Her advancing age and Winston's stubbornness had made their twice-daily walks increasingly challenging, and Carmen had proven to be exactly what they both needed. "Please, Carmen, how many times must I tell you? It's Bridget. Mrs. Jones makes me sound like a headmistress." Carmen grinned, clipping Winston's lead to his collar with practiced efficiency. "Old habits. My grandmother would box my ears if she heard me calling an elder by her first name." "Your grandmother sounds formidable. I think I'd have liked her." "You would have. She had your same way of saying exactly what she thought. Consequences be damned." Carmen paused, studying Bridget's face with the perceptive gaze that had made her so effective in her former career. "Rough day?" Bridget hesitated. Carmen had become more than just Winston's dog walker over the past months. She'd become something approaching a friend. But admitting to memory problems felt like opening a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. Just the usual confusion about appointments and such. "Nothing dramatic." Carmen's expression sharpened almost imperceptibly. In her 15 years as an immigration caseworker, she'd developed a finely tuned radar for the kinds of struggles that immigrants, even long-term residents like Bridget, faced when they began to seem vulnerable. The way people suddenly started speaking slower, offering unsolicited help, questioning competency they'd never questioned before. What kind of confusion? "Oh, you know how it is. American scheduling systems. Medical appointments. I sometimes wonder if I'll ever truly master the intricacies of this country's bureaucracy." Carmen nodded, but something in Bridget's tone didn't quite ring true. After decades of listening to people navigate complex systems while dealing with cultural barriers, she could usually distinguish between genuine confusion and something else. This felt like something else. "Well, Winston and I will sort ourselves out. You just put your feet up and have a nice cup of tea. Very British solution to most problems, yes?" Bridget laughed despite herself. "Quite right. Though I've corrupted myself with American coffee over the years. Robert's influence, I'm afraid." As Carmen and Winston disappeared around the corner, Bridget found herself thinking about that morning's doctor's appointment again. She walked back into her house and straight to the kitchen, where her appointment diary sat open on the counter next to the telephone. There, in her own handwriting, clear as day, Dr. Patterson, Thursday, 2:30 p.m. She stared at the entry for a long moment, then flipped back through the previous pages. Her handwriting was consistent, neat, perfectly legible, no signs of confusion or uncertainty. So why had the appointment been scheduled for 1:30? The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Jessica's voice bubbled through the receiver with characteristic enthusiasm. "Bridget, honey, I wanted to remind you about Sunday dinner this week. Mike's making his famous barbecue, and Tyler's coming up from college. It'll be so nice to have the whole family together." "That sounds lovely, dear. What time would you like me there?" "Oh, the usual time. 4 o'clock? And Bridget? Maybe don't drive yourself this time. The traffic on Highway 26 has been absolutely terrible lately, and you know how those other drivers can be with." That afternoon, as Carmen walked home through the tree-lined streets of southeast Portland, her mind was already working on the problem. She'd seen this pattern before. Family members systematically undermining an elder's reputation in the community, creating a narrative of incompetence that could later be used to justify removing their autonomy. The motivations were usually financial. She thought about Jessica's designer clothes, her perfectly maintained appearance, the way she'd positioned herself as the concerned family member stepping in to help. In Carmen's experience, people who were genuinely concerned about an elder's welfare didn't need to publicize that concern quite so broadly. Meanwhile, Bridget sat in her kitchen with Winston at her feet, staring at her wall calendar. Every appointment, every commitment, every social obligation was clearly marked in her neat handwriting. Her driver's license was current, her bills were paid on time, her house was immaculate. She was not losing her mind. But someone wanted everyone to think she was. The realization should have been alarming, but instead, Bridget felt a familiar thrill, the same intellectual excitement she'd experienced reading the best mystery novels in her bookshop. Someone was playing a very dangerous game, and they'd made the mistake of choosing an opponent who'd spent decades analyzing plots, motivations, and the psychology of deception. She reached for her phone and dialed Jessica's number. "Hello, dear," she said when Jessica answered. "I was wondering if you might join me for tea tomorrow afternoon. I'd like to have a proper chat about all this helpful concern you've been showing. Just the two of us." The pause on the other end of the line was telling. "Of course, Bridget. I'll be there at 3. "Perfect. I'll put the kettle on." As she hung up, Bridget realized she was smiling for the first time in days. Tomorrow's conversation would be very interesting indeed. The next morning, Bridget was arranging roses from her garden when she heard Jessica's voice drifting through the open kitchen window. Her stepdaughter was on the phone in the driveway, apparently taking a call before their scheduled tea. "No, the progression is definitely accelerating," Jessica was saying, her voice carrying that practiced tone of concerned sadness. "The doctor says we need to start thinking about next steps. The confusion is getting worse, and she's becoming more resistant to help." Bridget froze, her pruning shears halfway to a stem. "What doctor?" She hadn't seen Dr. Patterson since the appointment mix-up, and that had been routine blood work. "I know it's hard to accept," Jessica continued, "but the signs are all there. Missing appointments, forgetting conversations, repeating stories. Yesterday she called me 3 times asking about the same thing. That was categorically untrue." Bridget had called Jessica exactly once, to invite her for tea. "Mike keeps saying I should just let her be, but honestly, what if she leaves the stove on? What if she forgets to take her medications? I couldn't live with myself if something happened." Jessica's voice was moving closer to the house. Bridget quickly stepped away from the window. her heart pounding with a mixture of rage and revelation. This wasn't concerned family support. This was deliberate character assassination. By the time Jessica knocked on the front door, Bridget had composed herself, though her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the tea service. Years of British social conditioning came to her rescue, providing the familiar rituals that allowed her to function while her mind reeled. "Bridget, honey, you look lovely today," Jessica said, settling into the chair at the kitchen table with practiced familiarity. "I brought some of those biscuits you like from the bakery on Division." "How thoughtful." Bridget's voice was carefully neutral as she poured tea into her best china cups. "I couldn't help but notice you were on a call when you arrived. I hope everything's well." Jessica's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "Oh, just coordinating some family things. You know how it is." "Indeed I do. Speaking of family coordination, I'm curious about something. You mentioned to Father O'Sullivan that I'd been missing Mass due to confusion about scheduling?" "Well, yes. You seemed upset about missing it, so I thought. But I deliberately chose not to attend because there was a particularly good masterpiece theater adaptation on." Bridget's tone remained pleasant, conversational. "I've been doing that for 20 years. Robert used to joke about it." Jessica blinked, momentarily off balance. "Oh well, perhaps I misunderstood. You seemed so scattered when we talked about it." "When did we talk about it?" The question hung in the air. Jessica's confident mask slipped slightly as she realized she'd been caught in a fabrication. Well, it was. You mentioned it in passing, I think." "I see." Bridget sipped her tea delicately. "And yesterday, when you were just outside speaking on the phone, you mentioned that I'd called you 3 times asking about the same thing." "What was I asking about?" Jessica's face flushed. "Bridget, I think you might be confused." "Am I?" "Because I have a very clear memory of calling you exactly once to invite you for tea. Unless you're suggesting I've forgotten 2 additional phone calls within 24 hours? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. Jessica seemed to be calculating rapidly, weighing her options. "Honey, this is exactly what I'm talking about. The fact that you think you only called once when—" "Stop." Bridget's voice cut through Jessica's words with unexpected steel. "Just stop, Jessica. I heard you on the phone. I heard you telling someone that a doctor said my condition was progressing, that I was becoming more resistant to help. What doctor? What condition? What progression?" Jessica's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "I haven't seen any doctor except for routine blood work. I haven't been diagnosed with anything. I haven't forgotten any conversations or missed any appointments that I actually scheduled." Bridget's British accent became more pronounced as her anger grew. "So I'll ask you directly, what exactly are you doing?" "I'm trying to help you." Jessica's voice rose, desperation creeping in. "I'm trying to protect you from what? From living my own life? From managing my own affairs?" Bridget stood up, her composure cracking. "You've been systematically telling people I'm incompetent. My book club treats me like I'm senile. Father O'Sullivan thinks I'm having memory episodes. Even my doctor's office believes I'm chronically confused about appointments." Jessica's facade finally crumbled. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Do you have any idea what it's like having everyone expect me to take care of you? You're not even really family. You're just some British woman my father married." The words hung in the air like a slap. Years of buried resentment spilled out in that single, vicious sentence. "There it is," Bridget said quietly. "The truth at last." Jessica seemed to realize what she'd revealed. "I didn't mean—" "Oh, but you did mean it. Every word." Bridget's voice was calm now, almost clinical. "The question is, what do you hope to gain from this elaborate performance? What's worth destroying your relationship with your family? Worth systematically undermining someone who's never done you any harm?" Jessica's eyes darted around the kitchen, taking in the updated appliances, the well-maintained space, the comfortable furnishings that spoke of financial security. "This house," Bridget said, following her gaze. "It's about this house, isn't it? And Robert's life insurance. His savings. You think if everyone believes I'm incompetent, you can step in as the concerned family member and take control." Quote, "It should have been mine anyway," Jessica whispered, the pretense finally abandoned. "He was my father. This was supposed to be my inheritance." Bridget felt a strange sense of relief. After weeks of questioning her own sanity, of wondering if she was losing her grip on reality, the truth was almost liberating. She wasn't going mad. She was being deliberately driven to appear mad. "Well then," she said, sitting back down and refilling her teacup with steady hands, "I suppose we understand each other now. The only question remaining is what happens next." Jessica looked up hopefully, perhaps thinking she could still manipulate the situation. "Here's what's going to happen," Bridget continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades managing difficult customers and suppliers. "You're going to leave my house. You're going to stop spreading lies about my mental state. And you're going to seriously consider what kind of person you've become." "And if I don't?" Bridget smiled, and for the first time in the conversation, it was genuinely warm. "Then, my dear stepdaughter, you're about to discover that this supposedly confused old British woman is far more formidable than you imagined." After Jessica left, her designer heels clicking angrily down the front steps, Bridget sat in her kitchen, feeling simultaneously vindicated and terrified. The truth was out, but knowing Jessica's motivations didn't make the situation less dangerous. If anything, it made it worse. A desperate person with financial pressures and a sense of entitlement was capable of escalating far beyond subtle manipulation. When Carmen arrived for Winston's evening walk, she found Bridget pacing in the living room, a legal pad covered in notes clutched in her hands. "She confessed," Bridget said without preamble. "Jessica admitted everything. It's about money. The house, Robert's life insurance, his savings. She thinks it should have been hers." Carmen's expression grew grim. What exactly did she say? As Bridget recounted the confrontation, Carmen's professional instincts kicked into high gear. She'd seen this pattern before: adult children systematically undermining elderly parents or step-parents to gain control of assets. The tactics were depressingly familiar: social isolation, reputation destruction, and ultimately, conservatorship proceedings. "You need legal help," Carmen said bluntly. "This isn't going to stop here. People like Jessica don't just give up when they're exposed. They double down. I've been thinking the same thing. Do you know any attorneys who specialize in, well, whatever this is? Elder law. And yes, I know someone perfect." Carmen pulled out her phone. "Rebecca Walsh. She's Irish-American, understands the immigrant experience, and she's built her practice around protecting seniors from exactly this kind of family exploitation." The next morning, Bridget found herself in the downtown Portland office of Walsh & Associates, sitting across from a woman who reminded her strongly of her late sister. Red hair going gracefully gray, sharp green eyes, and the kind of no-nonsense manner that inspired immediate confidence. "Mrs. Jones," Rebecca Walsh said, reviewing the notes Bridget had prepared. "What you're describing is called elder financial abuse through reputation assassination. It's more common than you might think, especially with foreign-born seniors." "Foreign-born? But I've lived here for 20 years. Doesn't matter. To people like your stepdaughter, you'll always be an outsider, which makes you seem more vulnerable. The cultural confusion narrative plays into existing stereotypes about immigrants being unable to navigate American systems." Rebecca's Irish accent carried the authority of experience. "The good news is that Jessica has made several tactical errors." "Such as?" "She's been too public with her campaign. The more people she's contacted, the more witnesses we have to her deliberate misrepresentation of your condition. Her confession to you yesterday was also remarkably foolish, though people in desperate financial situations often make poor decisions." Rebecca explained the legal landscape with clinical precision. Jessica could potentially file for emergency conservatorship, claiming Bridget was a danger to herself. If successful, it would give Jessica control over all of Bridget's financial and medical decisions. How do we prevent that? Quote, "We build a counter-narrative supported by evidence. Medical evaluations, witness statements, documentation of your competency. We also investigate Jessica's financial situation. People don't usually attempt this kind of fraud unless they're in serious trouble." Over the next week, Carmen proved invaluable in the investigation. Her background in casework had taught her how to navigate public records. And what she discovered about Jessica's financial situation was illuminating. "She's in serious debt," Carmen reported, spreading printouts across Bridget's kitchen table. "Her lifestyle blog has maybe 300 regular readers. Her online boutique has been hemorrhaging money for 2 years. She owes nearly $40,000 on credit cards alone. And Mike lost his Boeing job 18 months ago. He's been doing freelance engineering work, but it's inconsistent. They're behind on their mortgage, their son's college tuition is due, and their credit score has tanked." The picture was becoming clearer. Jessica wasn't just greedy, she was desperate. Father O'Sullivan proved to be an unexpected ally when Bridget approached him directly. After she explained the situation, his response was swift and decisive. That manipulative little. He caught himself, remembering his caller. "I've been a priest for 30 years, Bridget. I know the difference between genuine concern and calculated deception. The way she spoke about you, the things she implied, it never sat right with me. Would you be willing to provide a statement about your actual observations of my behavior?" "Absolutely, and I'll speak to Margaret and the other ladies from your book club. They deserve to know they've been manipulated as well." The breakthrough came when Tyler returned from college for a long weekend. Bridget had always enjoyed her step-grandson's company. He was one of the few family members who seemed genuinely interested in her stories about London and her bookshop days. When he knocked on her door Friday evening, she could see the confusion and distress in his young face. "Nan Bridget," he said, using the British term she'd taught him years ago, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course, love. Mom's been saying you're having memory problems, that you're getting confused, forgetting things. She's talking about getting you help, maybe moving you somewhere safer." His voice cracked slightly. "But you seem exactly the same to me. Sharp as always. What's really going on?" Bridget made a decision that would prove crucial. Instead of protecting Tyler from the ugly truth about his mother, she told him everything. She showed him the timeline she'd constructed, the evidence Carmen had gathered, the legal advice Rebecca had provided. Tyler's face went through a range of emotions: disbelief, anger, embarrassment, and finally, determination. "This is so messed up," he said finally. "I can't believe she'd do this to you, to our family." "She's your mother, Tyler. I don't want to put you in an impossible position." She put herself in this position. Tyler's voice carried a maturity that reminded Bridget of Robert. "And she put me in it too. I've been posting stuff on social media about being worried about you, because she asked me to. God, I feel so stupid." "You're not stupid. You trusted your mother. That's what children should be able to do." Tyler pulled out his phone. "I can prove she's lying. Look, I've been documenting family stuff for years. Videos, photos, conversations. There's probably tons of evidence here that shows you're totally fine." As Tyler scrolled through months of family gatherings, casual conversations, and holiday celebrations, a clear picture emerged. In every video, every photo, Bridget appeared alert, engaged, articulate. Her interactions with family members showed no signs of confusion or cognitive decline. "This is gold," Rebecca Walsh said when they showed her Tyler's documentation the following Monday. "Contemporaneous evidence that contradicts your stepdaughter's claims. Plus, we now have a family member willing to testify on your behalf. What's our next step? We get you a comprehensive neurological evaluation. Independent, thorough, unimpeachable. Then we wait for Jessica to make her move, because I guarantee she will. Desperate people don't just disappear when they're exposed. They escalate." Rebecca's prediction proved accurate sooner than expected. That Wednesday morning, Bridget's phone rang at 7 a.m. "Mrs. Jones? This is Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Pacific Northwest Mental Health Services. I understand there are some concerns about your cognitive function, and your family has requested an emergency evaluation. I have an opening this afternoon if you could come in." Bridget's hand tightened on the phone. "I'm sorry, which family member requested this evaluation?" "Your daughter, Jessica Miller Thompson. She's quite concerned about some recent incidents and thinks immediate assessment would be beneficial." "I see. And what happens after this assessment?" "Well, depending on the results, we might recommend additional support services, or in some cases, protective intervention might be necessary." After hanging up, Bridget immediately called Rebecca Walsh. "She's making her move," Rebecca said grimly. "Don't go to that appointment." Dr. Hendricks works closely with the court system on conservatorship cases. This is Jessica's attempt to get official documentation of your supposed incompetency. So what do? We beat her to it. I'm calling Dr. Amanda Rodriguez right now. Time to get you that evaluation. But on our terms, with a neurologist who specializes in distinguishing between actual cognitive decline and cultural manipulation. As Bridget hung up, she realized the game had entered a new phase. Jessica had moved from subtle manipulation to direct legal action. The gloves were officially off, but for the first time since this nightmare began, Bridget felt ready for the fight. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez's office in the medical district felt like a sanctuary compared to the sterile institutional setting where Jessica had tried to trap her. Warm wood paneling, comfortable chairs, and family photos created an atmosphere of genuine care rather than clinical judgment. "Mrs. Jones," Dr. Rodriguez said, reviewing the preliminary paperwork, "I want you to understand that this evaluation serves two purposes. First, we need to establish a comprehensive baseline of your cognitive function. Second, I need to document how cultural manipulation can be weaponized against immigrant seniors." Cultural manipulation? What your stepdaughter has been doing, using stereotypes about confused foreign-born elderly people to undermine your credibility, is unfortunately common. I've seen it with my own grandmother, who emigrated from Mexico 60 years ago but was still treated like she couldn't understand American systems. The evaluation process was unlike anything Bridget had expected. Rather than simple memory tests, Dr. Rodriguez conducted an extensive exploration of Bridget's cognitive abilities, cultural adaptation, and the specific ways Jessica's campaign had exploited immigrant vulnerabilities. "Tell me about managing your finances since your husband's death," Dr. Rodriguez said, making notes on her tablet. "I've handled all the bills since Robert passed. Set up online banking, learned the American tax system, though I still maintain it's unnecessarily complicated compared to the British system. I balance my checkbook monthly, manage my investments through Edward Jones, and I've actually increased my savings by 12% over the past 3 years. And your social connections? I have my book club, church when I choose to attend, gardening club in the spring. I volunteer at the library's literacy program twice a month. I maintain correspondence with friends in London and visit annually." Bridget paused. "Though recently, people have been treating me differently. Speaking slower, offering help I don't need." Exactly. Cultural stereotyping becomes a weapon when someone systematically reinforces those stereotypes. Dr. Rodriguez's expression grew serious. "Your stepdaughter has been extremely clever. She's exploited the fact that many Americans have preconceived notions about elderly immigrants being confused by quote, American systems." The cognitive testing revealed what Bridget already knew but needed documented. Her memory was excellent, her reasoning skills sharp, her ability to process complex information above average for any age group. The cultural competency assessment showed someone who had successfully navigated American systems for 2 decades while maintaining her British identity. "Mrs. Jones, your cognitive function is not only intact, it's exceptional. Your ability to manage complex financial decisions, maintain social relationships, and adapt to cultural differences while preserving your own identity shows remarkable resilience and intelligence." But the most illuminating part of the evaluation came when Dr. Rodriguez asked about specific incidents Jessica had cited as evidence of decline. "She told people I was confused about appointment times because of cultural differences. But I've been using the American time system for 20 years. I ran a business here." Cultural gaslighting, Dr. Rodriguez said grimly. Making someone doubt their own competency by attributing normal human mistakes to their cultural background. It's a form of psychological abuse. The evaluation took 3 hours, covering everything from complex reasoning tasks to discussions about cultural identity and adaptation. When it was finished, Dr. Rodriguez's conclusions were unequivocal. "I'll have my formal report ready tomorrow, but I can tell you now, there is absolutely no evidence of cognitive decline." What I do see is evidence of someone being systematically undermined through cultural stereotyping and family manipulation. Meanwhile, across town, Mike Thompson was having his own crisis of conscience. He'd discovered Jessica's appointment scheduling for the mental health evaluation purely by accident. Her calendar notification had popped up on their shared iPad while he was checking his work schedule. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His wife wasn't just concerned about Bridget's welfare. She was actively trying to have her declared incompetent. The woman who'd welcomed him into the family, who remembered his birthday and asked about his job interviews, who made his favorite shepherd's pie whenever they visited. That evening, Mike confronted Jessica in their kitchen while Tyler was upstairs studying. "Jess, what the hell is this appointment with Dr. Hendricks about?" Jessica's face went pale. "It's for Bridget's own good. She needs help." "Bullshit." Mike's voice was quiet but firm. "I've been watching you, listening to your phone calls. You've been lying about her, haven't you?" "She's confused, Mike. She can't manage on her own." "She manages fine. Better than we do, frankly. When's the last time we balanced our checkbook? When's the last time we organized anything as well as she organizes her life?" Jessica's composure cracked. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Everyone expects me to take care of her, and we can barely take care of ourselves. So this is about money." The accusation hung between them. Jessica's silence was answer enough. "Jesus, Jess, what have you done?" "I've been trying to secure our family's future. That house should be Tyler's inheritance, not some random British woman's to give away to charity or whatever she decides to do with it. She's not some random woman. She's Tyler's grandmother. She's been part of this family longer than I have." Mike sank into a chair, the full scope of his wife's deception becoming clear. "How long has this been going on?" "Since Dad died. I started small, just mentioning little concerns to people. But she's so stubborn, so determined to prove she doesn't need help. Because she doesn't need help." Quote, their argument was interrupted by footsteps on the stairs. Tyler appeared in the doorway, his face a mixture of confusion and growing understanding. "Mom, what's this about Nan Bridget needing help? And why are you shouting about inheritance?" The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler looked between his parents, pieces clicking into place with the terrible clarity of youth. "You've been lying about her, haven't you?" Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. "All those posts you asked me to make, all the times you said she was getting confused, you made it up." Jessica's face crumpled. "Tyler, honey, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Tyler's voice carried a maturity that seemed to have appeared overnight. "You've been trying to steal from Nan Bridget. And you made me help you do it." As Tyler stormed out of the house, Mike remained seated at the kitchen table, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "I can't be part of this, Jess. Whatever you've started, it ends now." "It's too late to stop it now," Jessica whispered. "I've already filed the preliminary paperwork for the evaluation. If I back down now, she'll know everything." "She already knows everything. The question is what you're going to do about it." But even as Mike spoke, he could see in Jessica's eyes that she'd gone too far to turn back. Desperation had a momentum of its own, and his wife was caught in its current. The next morning, Dr. Rodriguez's report arrived at Rebecca Walsh's office with the force of vindication. Bridget's cognitive abilities were not only intact, but exceptional. More importantly, the report included a detailed analysis of how cultural stereotypes had been weaponized against her. "This is even better than I hoped," Rebecca told Bridget over the phone. "Dr. Rodriguez has essentially provided a roadmap for how your stepdaughter committed elder abuse through cultural manipulation. What happens now? Now we wait for Jessica's next move. And based on what Tyler told you about his parents' fight last night, I suspect it's coming soon." Rebecca's prediction proved accurate within hours. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Bridget's doorbell rang with unusual persistence. She opened it to find Jessica standing on her porch, flanked by Mike and Tyler, though their body language suggested they were there reluctantly. "We need to talk," Jessica announced, pushing past Bridget into the living room. Her usual polished appearance was disheveled, her voice carrying the edge of someone operating on desperation and little sleep. "By all means, come in. Bridget said dryly, following her uninvited guests into her own living room. Jessica began pacing immediately, her nervous energy filling the space. You missed your appointment with Dr. Hendricks yesterday. That was incredibly irresponsible, Bridget. We're trying to help you. Help me with what, precisely? With getting the care you need? The support you obviously require? Jessica's voice rose sharply. You can't keep pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't. Tyler shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, while Mike stared at his hands. Neither would meet Bridget's eyes, but their presence felt more like moral support for her than backup for Jessica. Jessica! Bridget's voice was calm, measured. I have something to show you. She retrieved the thick manila folder from her desk and set it on the coffee table. Dr. Rodriguez's report lay on top, its official letterhead clearly visible. What is that? Jessica's pacing stopped abruptly. A comprehensive neurological evaluation conducted by Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, one of the region's leading specialists in geriatric neurology and cultural competency. Bridget opened the folder deliberately. Would you like me to read the summary? Jessica's face went white. You can't just go get your own evaluation. That's not how this works. Actually, it's exactly how this works. I'm not under conservatorship, Jessica. I'm a competent adult who can seek medical care from any physician I choose. Bridget's British accent sharpened with each word. Dr. Rodriguez found my cognitive function to be not only intact, but exceptional for any age group. That's impossible. You've been confused, missing appointments. The only appointment I missed was one I never scheduled. Dr. Hendricks works primarily with the court system on involuntary commitment cases, doesn't she? Interesting choice for someone genuinely concerned about a family member's welfare. Mike finally looked up. Jess, just stop, please. But Jessica was beyond stopping. Cornered and desperate, she doubled down with increasing hysteria. You've been manipulating everyone, using your accent, playing the poor widow, making people feel sorry for you while you hoard money that should go to Robert's real family. His real family? Bridget's voice was dangerously quiet. I'm his daughter. Tyler is his grandson. You're just some foreign woman who charmed him in his old age. Tyler stood up abruptly. Mom, stop it. Just stop. Don't you understand? Jessica whirled on her son. She's going to give everything away. The house, the savings, everything your grandfather worked for. She doesn't care about preserving it for you because you're not really her family. She is my family, Tyler said firmly. She's been my grandmother since I was 3 years old. She taught me about London, helped with my school projects, remembered every birthday, every graduation. That's what family does. Tyler's right, Mike added quietly. Bridget has been nothing but kind to all of us. And you? He looked at his wife with something approaching disgust. You've been lying to everyone we know, including our own son. Jessica's composure finally shattered completely. Years of resentment poured out in a torrent of accusations and self-pity. You have no idea what it's been like. Everyone always talking about how wonderful Bridget is. How charming, how brave she is for starting over in America. Do you know what it's like having people constantly compare you to your father's second wife? Having people act like she's more interesting than his actual daughter? The room fell silent except for Jessica's ragged breathing. And then he died, and suddenly I'm responsible for her. Everyone expects me to take care of the poor British widow, to manage her appointments, to worry about whether she's eating properly or paying her bills. But she doesn't want help. She just wants to keep proving how independent she is while sitting on a fortune that should belong to Tyler. The fortune, Bridget said slowly, that your father earned during our marriage. The house we bought together. The life insurance policy that lists me as the beneficiary. You manipulated him into changing his will. I did no such thing. Robert's will was updated after we married, as any sensible person would do. The bulk of his estate comes to me, with provisions for Tyler's education and a substantial bequest to you. Bridget's voice remained steady despite Jessica's increasing agitation. You've never actually read the will, have you? Jessica's face went blank. What do you mean, provisions for Tyler? Bequest to me? Bridget retrieved another document from her folder. Robert left you $50,000, Jessica, and he established a college fund for Tyler, that covers full tuition plus living expenses. You would have known this if you'd ever asked to see the will instead of assuming I'd cut you out entirely. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stared at the will's summary page as if it were written in a foreign language. 50. But the house is worth 3 times that. Yes, it is, and it's mine. Just as it would have been yours if you'd inherited it from your father directly. Bridget folded the documents carefully. The difference is that Robert trusted me to use our shared assets responsibly, while your behavior over the past months suggests his instincts about your financial judgment were quite accurate. Mike stood up slowly. We're leaving, now. But, Jessica started. Now, Jessica. Mike's voice carried finality. Tyler, get in the car. As Tyler moved toward the door, he stopped beside Bridget's chair. Nan, Bridget, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I helped her do this to you. Oh, love. Bridget reached up to squeeze his hand. You trusted your mother. That's what children should be able to do. This isn't your fault. Will you? Will you forgive me? There's nothing to forgive. But perhaps next time come to me directly if you're worried about something. Families should be able to talk to each other honestly. Tyler nodded, tears threatening. I love you, Nan. I love you too, dear one. As the family reached the front door, Jessica turned back one final time, her face a mask of defeated rage. This isn't over, Bridget. I've already filed preliminary paperwork. There are people who believe you're incompetent. And they'll listen to me before they listen to some foreign doctor you paid to say what you wanted to hear. Bridget smiled with genuine warmth for the first time during the entire confrontation. Jessica, darling, she said, her British accent wrapping around the words like silk around steel. You've just threatened me in front of witnesses while standing in my home after I've presented medical evidence of my competency. I rather think Dr. Rodriguez wasn't the only person I should have consulted. She gestured toward the dining room, where Carmen emerged with her phone still recording. Carmen has been documenting this entire conversation. And Rebecca Walsh, my attorney, will be very interested to hear how you plan to proceed with legal action based on fabricated evidence. Jessica's face crumpled with the realization that she'd just provided perfect evidence for her own prosecution. As the door closed behind them, Bridget turned to Carmen with exhausted relief. Well, she said, I think that went rather well, don't you? Bridget's optimism proved premature. 3 days later, Rebecca Walsh called with grim news. She's filed for emergency conservatorship, claiming you're having a mental health crisis and pose a danger to yourself. The petition includes sworn statements from multiple witnesses alleging cognitive decline and concerning behavior. Bridget sank into her kitchen chair, Winston pressing against her legs with the intuitive comfort of an old dog sensing distress. Multiple witnesses? Dr. Hendricks, who you never actually saw, has provided a preliminary assessment based on Jessica's reports. Margaret from your book club apparently signed a statement expressing concern. Even your previous doctor's office provided records of your supposed chronic confusion about appointments. But we have Dr. Rodriguez's evaluation, which Jessica's attorney is claiming was obtained under false pretenses, paid for privately, and conducted by a doctor with a bias toward immigrant patients. Rebecca's voice carried professional fury. They're arguing that your ability to manipulate the evaluation process actually demonstrates the cunning often seen in early-stage dementia patients. The twisted logic was breathtaking. Bridget's competence was being used as evidence of her incompetence. When is the hearing? Tomorrow morning. Emergency conservatorship hearings move fast deliberately. The theory being that if someone is truly in crisis, delays could be dangerous. That evening, Carmen organized what she privately called the resistance. Father O'Sullivan arrived first, carrying a folder thick with documentation. Margaret Chen followed, looking embarrassed and determined in equal measure. I need to explain about that statement, Margaret said immediately. Jessica came to me crying, saying you'd been calling her at all hours, repeating the same questions. She showed me what looked like medical records suggesting you were having episodes. I signed the statement because I was worried about you. What did these medical records say? Margaret pulled out her phone, showing a photo she'd taken. I was suspicious enough to document it. Look at this. The image showed what appeared to be official medical notes describing confusion, memory loss, and concerning behavioral changes. But as Bridget studied it more closely, she noticed something crucial. These aren't from Dr. Patterson's office. This letterhead, I've never seen it before. Father O'Sullivan leaned in. Those are completely fabricated. I've seen enough medical documentation in my pastoral work to recognize the real thing. This is sophisticated fraud. Tyler arrived next, carrying his laptop and a determined expression that reminded Bridget strongly of Robert. I've been going through everything, he announced. Mom made a huge mistake asking me to help with social media. I documented everything. He opened his laptop to reveal a meticulously organized timeline of posts, photos, and videos, spanning the past 6 months. Look at this. Here's Mom posting about being, quote, concerned about Grandma Bridget's increasing confusion, on the same day you sent me that perfectly coherent text about helping me with my history paper. The evidence was damning. Jessica's social media campaign painted a picture of steadily declining cognitive function. But Tyler's documentation showed Bridget's continued competence throughout the entire period. There's more, Tyler continued. I found Mom's browser history. She's been researching conservatorship laws, elder care facilities, and property transfer procedures for months. She even looked up, quote, how long until dementia patients lose legal capacity. Carmen whistled low. Premeditated elder abuse. This isn't desperation. This is calculated fraud. Mike arrived last, looking haggard and carrying a manila envelope. I've been sleeping in my brother's guest room since the confrontation, he said quietly. Jess doesn't know I'm here. He handed the envelope to Bridget. These are Jessica's financial records. Credit card statements, loan documents, business records. She's been hiding the extent of our debt from me. The numbers were staggering. Jessica owed nearly $60,000 across multiple credit cards, had taken cash advances to make minimum payments, and had secretly refinanced their house twice. Her online boutique showed consistent losses for 18 months. She's been using business credit lines to pay personal expenses, Mike explained. We're looking at bankruptcy if something doesn't change soon. When I confronted her about the conservatorship plan, she broke down and admitted she's been counting on getting control of your assets to save us. Rebecca Walsh arrived as the group was reviewing the evidence, and her expression shifted from concern to professional satisfaction as she assessed their documentation. This is even better than I hoped. We have proof of financial desperation, premeditation, document fabrication, and systematic manipulation of community members. She looked around the room. Are you all willing to testify? The unanimous agreement was immediate and emphatic. The next morning, Multnomah County Courthouse buzzed with unusual activity for an emergency conservatorship hearing. Bridget arrived with her support team, surprised to find additional allies waiting. Eleanor Martinez from the book club approached with several other members. Margaret told us what really happened. We're here to set the record straight. Even more surprising was the presence of Dr. Patterson's office manager, holding a thick file. When we heard about this hearing, we reviewed all of Mrs. Jones's actual appointments. The confusion about scheduling? It came from changes made by someone calling on her behalf, changes Mrs. Jones never authorized. Judge Patricia Coleman called the hearing to order in a courtroom packed with an unusual number of observers for what should have been a routine procedural matter. Jessica's attorney, David Brennan, presented their case first. He painted a picture of a vulnerable elderly immigrant whose cognitive decline was being masked by stubborn independence and cultural confusion. Your Honor, Mrs. Jones's own family members have documented concerning behavior patterns. Medical professionals have noted chronic confusion and disorientation. Community members have observed increasing isolation and erratic decision-making. But when Rebecca Walsh stood to respond, the courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. Your Honor, this is not a case of cognitive decline requiring protective intervention. This is a case of systematic elder abuse perpetrated by a financially desperate family member, who has fabricated evidence and manipulated community perceptions to gain control of my client's assets. Rebecca methodically presented the evidence: Dr. Rodriguez's comprehensive evaluation, Tyler's social media documentation, Mike's financial records, and the fabricated medical documents Margaret had photographed. When Father O'Sullivan took the stand, his testimony was particularly damaging to Jessica's case. Mrs. Miller-Thompson specifically asked me to speak slower when talking to Mrs. Jones, claiming she had difficulty following conversations. But in my direct interactions with Mrs. Jones, she consistently demonstrated sharp intellect, complex reasoning, and detailed memory. She corrected my Latin pronunciation during a theological discussion just last month. Tyler's testimony proved devastating. He walked the court through months of documentation showing his grandmother's continued competence, while his mother simultaneously claimed evidence of decline. She asked me to post about being worried about Grandma's memory on the same day Grandma helped me solve a complex calculus problem over FaceTime. Tyler testified, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of testifying against his mother. When Dr. Rodriguez took the stand, her testimony went beyond medical evaluation to cultural education. Mrs. Jones has been the victim of cultural gaslighting, having normal human mistakes attributed to her immigrant status and age, creating doubt about her competency. This is a recognized form of elder abuse that disproportionately affects foreign-born seniors. Jessica's case collapsed entirely when Judge Coleman reviewed the fabricated medical documents. Mr. Brennan, these documents appear to be fraudulent. The medical office letterhead doesn't match any licensed practice in Oregon, and the formatting is inconsistent with standard medical documentation. Jessica's attorney looked genuinely shocked as he examined the evidence his client had provided. Your Honor, I was not aware these documents were fabricated. I would like to request a recess to consult with my client. Motion denied. Mrs. Miller-Thompson, please approach the bench. As Jessica stood before the judge, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. Mrs. Miller-Thompson, do you understand that filing false documentation in conservatorship proceedings constitutes multiple felonies, including elder abuse, fraud, and perjury? Jessica's whispered yes was barely audible. Judge Coleman's ruling was swift and comprehensive. The petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. Mrs. Jones has demonstrated clear cognitive competency and decision-making capacity. Furthermore, this court finds evidence of systematic elder abuse and fraud. She turned to Rebecca Walsh. Counselor, I assume you'll be filing criminal complaints? Yes, Your Honor. We'll be requesting prosecution for elder abuse, fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. As the courtroom cleared, Bridget found herself surrounded by friends and supporters she hadn't even realized she had. The community that Jessica had tried to turn against her had instead rallied to her defense. But even in victory, Bridget felt the profound sadness of a family irreparably broken by greed and desperation. 2 weeks after the hearing, the independent medical evaluation ordered by Judge Coleman confirmed Dr. Rodriguez's findings with even greater specificity. Dr. Patricia Henley from Oregon Health and Science University found Bridget's cognitive function to be in the 95th percentile for her age group, with particular strengths in complex reasoning and cultural adaptation. The report landed on Rebecca Walsh's desk the same morning Jessica made her final desperate gambit. She's threatening to contest Robert's will, Rebecca informed Bridget over the phone. Claims he was manipulated by your foreign influence and wasn't mentally competent when he updated it after your marriage. Bridget felt a familiar surge of rage, though it was tempered now by exhaustion. 20 years of marriage, and she still sees me as a foreign interloper. The good news is that challenging a will requires substantial evidence of undue influence or incompetency. The bad news is that it could tie up the estate for months, even years. That afternoon, Mike appeared at Bridget's door carrying 2 suitcases and wearing the hollow expression of a man whose life had imploded. I've left her, he said simply. Filed for divorce this morning. Tyler's staying with me. Bridget invited him in, noting how he'd aged in the past weeks. The stress had carved new lines around his eyes and left his shoulders permanently hunched. I'm sorry, Mike. I know this can't be easy. She's facing criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. Our house is in foreclosure. And yesterday I discovered she'd been forging my signature on loan applications. Mike's voice was flat, emotionless. 20 years of marriage, and I never saw who she really was. Perhaps you saw who she was before the desperation consumed her. Mike looked up with something approaching gratitude. How can you still defend her after what she did to you? I'm not defending her actions. But I remember the young woman Robert introduced me to 23 years ago. She wasn't evil then, she was just lost. Looking for security, for a place to belong. Bridget poured tea with practiced calm. Greed and fear can transform people into unrecognizable versions of themselves. Tyler blames himself for helping her. He's been asking if you'll see him. Of course I will. He's always welcome here. 3 days later, Tyler sat in Bridget's garden helping her prepare flower beds for winter. His young face carried guilt far too heavy for his years. I keep thinking about all the posts I made, all the people I told about being worried about you. I helped her destroy your reputation. Tyler, love, you believed your mother when she told you I needed help. That shows you have a good heart, not a gullible one. But I should have talked to you directly instead of just believing what she said. Yes, you should have, and next time you will. Bridget's voice was gentle but firm. That's how we learn, from our mistakes. The important thing is that when you finally understood what was happening, you chose to do the right thing regardless of the cost. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Jessica stood on the porch looking completely defeated. No designer clothes, no perfect makeup, just a broken woman facing the consequences of her choices. I don't expect forgiveness, she said when Bridget opened the door. I need you to know I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go that far. You fabricated medical documents, Jessica. You tried to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized. I was desperate. We were going to lose everything. And I kept thinking about how much money was just sitting there while we were drowning in debt. Jessica's voice cracked. I told myself I was protecting Tyler's inheritance, but really I was just scared. Scared enough to destroy an innocent person's life? I never thought of you as innocent. I thought you were this sophisticated foreign woman who'd charmed my father into changing his will. I convinced myself you were the manipulator. Bridget studied Jessica's face, seeing genuine remorse for perhaps the first time. Jessica, your father left you $50,000 and established Tyler's college fund because he loved you both. But he left me the bulk of his estate because he trusted me to use it wisely, something your recent behavior has proven he was right to question. Jessica nodded miserably. I know. I've destroyed everything. My marriage, my relationship with Tyler, my reputation. And for what? Money I was never going to get anyway. What will you do now? Face the criminal charges. Try to make amends somehow. Jessica looked up with desperate hope. Is there any chance? Could you ever forgive me? Bridget considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't the same as trust, Jessica. I can forgive you for acting out of desperation and fear, but I cannot trust you again, and I cannot simply overlook the damage you've done. As Jessica walked away into the Portland evening, Bridget realized that sometimes justice wasn't about punishment. It was about truth finally coming to light. 6 months later, Bridget stood at the podium in the Southeast Community Center, looking out at an audience of faces that reflected Portland's remarkable diversity. The monthly Elder Rights and Cultural Competency Workshop had grown from Carmen's initial suggestion into something approaching a movement. My name is Bridget Jones, she began, her British accent carrying clearly through the microphone. And 18 months ago, my American stepdaughter began a systematic campaign to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could gain control of my assets. The audience, social workers, family members, immigrant seniors, and community advocates listened with rapt attention as Bridget shared her story, not just the facts, but the emotional journey of self-doubt, isolation, and eventual empowerment. The insidious nature of cultural gaslighting, she continued, is that it exploits society's existing biases. When someone uses your accent, your unfamiliarity with certain systems, or your status as an immigrant against you, they're weaponizing prejudices that already exist. After her presentation, a Korean grandmother approached with tears in her eyes. "My daughter-in-law keeps telling doctors I don't understand American medicine. She translates everything, even though I speak English perfectly. Now they treat me like I'm confused." Carmen, who now served as the workshop's coordinator, took notes as similar stories emerged. An elderly Mexican man, whose son claimed he couldn't manage finances despite running a successful business for 30 years. A Russian woman whose family used her accent as evidence of cognitive decline. The pattern was depressingly familiar, but so was the solution: education, documentation, and community support. Mrs. Jones, a young social worker, asked during the Q&A, "How did you rebuild your confidence after months of being told you were incompetent?" Bridget smiled, thinking of Tyler, who'd just finished his first semester with a declared major in social work. "I surrounded myself with people who knew my actual capabilities rather than people who'd been told I was failing. Truth has a way of reasserting itself when you give it proper space." That evening, Bridget's house filled with the sounds of chosen family. Mike and Tyler arrived for their weekly dinner, a tradition that had grown from Tyler's initial guilt visits into genuine fellowship. Carmen came with fresh bread from the bakery where she'd started working part-time. Father O'Sullivan stopped by with news from the parish. "Any word on Jessica's sentencing?" Mike asked carefully. He'd maintained this awkward balance for months, acknowledging his ex-wife's crimes while not wanting to burden Bridget with details. 3 years probation, community service, and restitution, Bridget replied matter-of-factly. "Rebecca thinks it's fair, considering she pled guilty and is getting counseling. She's been attending the workshops," Carmen added quietly. "Sits in the back, doesn't speak, but she's there every month." This news surprised everyone. Tyler looked particularly conflicted. "Is that okay, having her there?" "It's a public workshop about elder abuse prevention," Bridget said thoughtfully. "If she's genuinely trying to understand what she did and why it was wrong, then perhaps that's exactly where she should be." The conversation moved to lighter topics: Tyler's internship applications, Mike's new job with a renewable energy company, Carmen's daughter's graduation from nursing school. The ordeal that had brought them together had transformed into something richer, a family built on choice rather than obligation. Later, as Bridget walked Winston through the quiet evening streets, she reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from trauma. The workshops had connected her with a community of advocates she'd never known existed. Her relationship with Tyler had deepened beyond the superficial pleasantries of obligatory family gatherings. Carmen had become the sister she'd never had. "What do you think, Winston?" she asked as they paused beneath a streetlight. "Ready for another chapter?" Winston's tail wagged with the enthusiasm of a dog who'd learned that sometimes the most interesting walks began when you thought you were lost. 1 year later, Bridget stood in the doorway of what had once been her beloved bookshop on Hawthorne Boulevard, watching as contractors installed the final sign: Robert Miller Community Resource Center, Elder Rights and Cultural Advocacy. The irony wasn't lost on her that the space where she'd once sold mysteries was now dedicated to solving real-life puzzles of exploitation and abuse. "It's perfect," Carmen said, joining her on the sidewalk. Robert would have loved knowing his name was on something that protected people. The transformation had taken months of planning, legal work, and community organizing. Using the settlement from Jessica's restitution and her own savings, Bridget had purchased her former bookshop and converted it into a comprehensive resource center. The front room housed a library of legal resources in multiple languages, the back office provided free consultations with elder law attorneys, and the upstairs apartment served as temporary housing for seniors fleeing family abuse. "Bridget, they're ready for you inside," Tyler called from the doorway. At 22, he'd grown into the kind of young man Robert would have been proud of: principled, compassionate, and stubborn about justice. His internship with the center would transition into full-time work after graduation, making him the youngest certified elder rights advocate in Oregon. Inside, the opening day celebration buzzed with familiar faces and new ones. Dr. Rodriguez had driven up from her practice to cut the ribbon. Margaret Chen and the book club members staffed the information tables. Father O'Sullivan blessed the space with words that managed to be both spiritual and practical. Rebecca Walsh mingled with other attorneys who'd volunteered their services. The surprise guest was Jessica. She approached Bridget hesitantly during a lull in the festivities, her appearance strikingly different from the polished manipulator of 2 years ago. Gone were the designer clothes and artificial confidence, replaced by simple attire and genuine humility. "Mrs. Miller-Thompson, please approach the bench." As Jessica stood before the judge, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. "Mrs. Miller-Thompson, do you understand that filing false documentation in conservatorship proceedings constitutes multiple felonies, including elder abuse, fraud, and perjury?" Jessica's whispered "yes" was barely audible. Judge Coleman's ruling was swift and comprehensive. The petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. Mrs. Jones has demonstrated clear cognitive competency and decision-making capacity. Furthermore, this court finds evidence of systematic elder abuse and fraud. She turned to Rebecca Walsh. "Counselor, I assume you'll be filing criminal complaints?" "Yes, Your Honor. We'll be requesting prosecution for elder abuse, fraud, perjury, and conspiracy." As the courtroom cleared, Bridget found herself surrounded by friends and supporters she hadn't even realized she had. The community that Jessica had tried to turn against her had instead rallied to her defense. But even in victory, Bridget felt the profound sadness of a family irreparably broken by greed and desperation. 2 weeks after the hearing, the independent medical evaluation ordered by Judge Coleman confirmed Dr. Rodriguez's findings with even greater specificity. Dr. Patricia Henley from Oregon Health and Science University found Bridget's cognitive function to be in the 95th percentile for her age group, with particular strengths in complex reasoning and cultural adaptation. The report landed on Rebecca Walsh's desk the same morning Jessica made her final desperate gambit. "She's threatening to contest Robert's will," Rebecca informed Bridget over the phone. "Claims he was manipulated by your foreign influence and wasn't mentally competent when he updated it after your marriage." Bridget felt a familiar surge of rage, though it was tempered now by exhaustion. 20 years of marriage, and she still sees me as a foreign interloper. The good news is that challenging a will requires substantial evidence of undue influence or incompetency. The bad news is that it could tie up the estate for months, even years. That afternoon, Mike appeared at Bridget's door carrying 2 suitcases and wearing the hollow expression of a man whose life had imploded. "I've left her," he said simply. "Filed for divorce this morning. Tyler's staying with me." Bridget invited him in, noting how he'd aged in the past weeks. The stress had carved new lines around his eyes and left his shoulders permanently hunched. "I'm sorry, Mike. I know this can't be easy. She's facing criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. Our house is in foreclosure. And yesterday I discovered she'd been forging my signature on loan applications." Mike's voice was flat, emotionless. 20 years of marriage, and I never saw who she really was." "Perhaps you saw who she was before the desperation consumed her." Mike looked up with something approaching gratitude. "How can you still defend her after what she did to you?" "I'm not defending her actions. But I remember the young woman Robert introduced me to 23 years ago. She wasn't evil then, she was just lost. Looking for security, for a place to belong." Bridget poured tea with practiced calm. Greed and fear can transform people into unrecognizable versions of themselves. "Tyler blames himself for helping her. He's been asking if you'll see him." "Of course I will. He's always welcome here." 3 days later, Tyler sat in Bridget's garden helping her prepare flower beds for winter. His young face carried guilt far too heavy for his years. "I keep thinking about all the posts I made, all the people I told about being worried about you. I helped her destroy your reputation. Tyler, love, you believed your mother when she told you I needed help. That shows you have a good heart, not a gullible one." "But I should have talked to you directly instead of just believing what she said." "Yes, you should have, and next time you will." Bridget's voice was gentle but firm. "That's how we learn, from our mistakes. The important thing is that when you finally understood what was happening, you chose to do the right thing regardless of the cost." That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Jessica stood on the porch looking completely defeated. No designer clothes, no perfect makeup, just a broken woman facing the consequences of her choices. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said when Bridget opened the door. She paused, watching Carmen lock up the resource materials for the night. "But I don't regret the outcome. This work, this place, these relationships, they've given me a purpose I never expected to find." As the last visitors filtered out and the space grew quiet, Bridget walked through the rooms one final time before locking up. The walls that had once held thousands of stories now displayed resource guides, legal notices, and photos from community events. Different stories, but stories nonetheless, tales of survival, advocacy, and the slow, steady work of building justice. She thought of Robert, whose life insurance money had partially funded this transformation, and smiled at the symmetry. He'd always believed in taking care of people, in using whatever resources you had to make the world a little more fair. She'd simply found a way to do it on a larger scale. Outside, Carmen waited with Winston's leash, ready for their evening constitutional through the neighborhood they'd all learned to call home. "Ready for tomorrow?" Carmen asked as they began their familiar route past the coffee shops and community gardens of southeast Portland. "Ready," Bridget replied, her British accent wrapping around the word with satisfaction. "Though I suspect it will bring surprises we haven't anticipated." "Good surprises or challenging ones?" "Both, I imagine, but that's rather the point, isn't it? If you're not growing, you're just marking time." As they walked through the tree-lined streets where her ordeal had begun, Bridget Jones realized she'd finally answered the question that had haunted her 2 years ago. She was neither detective nor victim. She was something far more powerful, a woman who'd refused to let others define her story, who'd transformed personal trauma into community healing, and who'd learned that sometimes the most profound victories came not from defeating your enemies, but from building something beautiful enough to outlast the damage they'd tried to inflict. The evening air carried the scent of approaching autumn, promising another season of change, growth, and possibility. And for the first time since Robert's death, Bridget found herself looking forward to whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote.